My name is Linda, and I'm 55 years old. At this stage in life, most people are easing into a gentler rhythm, gardening, traveling, spending weekends with grandchildren. My life wasn't quite like that. I had worked steadily for decades, carefully, methodically, saving every spare dollar until I could afford something I had never known growing up: stability. Real, tangible stability. The kind that came in the shape of an apartment deed with my name and my name alone printed on it. That apartment was more than a home. It was closure for every uncertain night of my childhood. Growing up with my parents, Margaret and Henry, meant never knowing if the electricity bill had been paid or if we'd have to move suddenly because a landlord refused to renew the lease after months of late payments. My parents always had an uncanny optimism about money, the sort that didn't rely on math or planning but on sheer hope and improvisation. They believed in miracles. I believed in budgeting. So when I finally signed for that two-bedroom unit, a modest, sunlit apartment overlooking a quiet street with old maple trees, I felt like I had broken a long-standing family curse. I bought it alone. I furnished it alone. I paid every mortgage bill on time, chipped away at the principal faster than the schedule required, and stood in front of those windows each morning with a cup of tea thinking, this is mine because I made it possible. 7 years later, when I accepted a year-long teaching contract abroad, something I'd always wanted to try but had rarely allowed myself to consider, I left my apartment with the sense that I would return to it refreshed, wiser, maybe even ready for the next chapter of life. I locked the doors, closed the blinds, set the thermostat low, and placed the spare key in a small envelope with a note, for emergencies only. I gave it to my parents because they were my only nearby relatives. The choice wasn't entirely comfortable. My parents had a history of blurring boundaries and treating possessions as communal property. But they were older now, slower, seemingly gentler. And in some quiet corner of my heart, I wanted to believe that time had mellowed their impulsiveness. I wanted to believe they had grown into the sort of parents who would respect a simple request. As I boarded the plane to my temporary home, a seaside town full of old stone buildings and cheerful markets, I was filled with a sense of peace. The job was fulfilling, the town was serene, and for the first time, I felt like a woman who could make choices purely for herself. I spent my afternoons walking along the harbor, conversing with my international students, and rediscovering my love of teaching. My parents and I spoke periodically. The conversations were light, routine. My mother asked about the weather. My father asked about the food. Nothing in their voices hinted at the brewing storm. They sounded normal. Ordinary. Just two aging parents living their same old life. Then one morning, bright, calm, and seemingly harmless, I received a bank notification while sipping tea by the window of my temporary flat. A large wire transfer attempt had been rejected. The sender's name was unfamiliar but included the words, closing services. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. Electronic banking errors happen all the time. I closed the alert and went about my day. But 2 days later, another alert appeared. Same sender. Same rejected transfer. Same enormous amount. This time, my stomach tightened. Something wasn't adding up. I called the bank, expecting to be told there had been an error, perhaps a misentered account number or a stray keystroke. But instead, the representative said, with chilling calm, this transfer corresponds to the sale of a property associated with your name. A cold sensation spread through me from the inside out. My apartment. My home. Sold. Without my consent. The bank agent continued speaking, but his words blurred in my ears. I felt the world tilt, not violently, but subtly, like a quiet shift in gravity. How? Who? Why? I hadn't authorized anything. I was thousands of miles away. I hadn't spoken to any realtor, hadn't signed a single document. My pulse hammered as I ended the call. There was only one logical explanation. I dialed my parents. My mother answered, sounding as breezy as ever. And in that moment, before either of us spoke, I knew my life had changed. I didn't ease into the conversation. Panic brushes aside all niceties. Mom, I said, did you sell my apartment? The question hung between us like a suspended blade. For a moment, I imagined she would laugh, confused, and ask what on earth I was talking about. But instead, her voice shifted, tight, defensive, laden with irritation rather than guilt. "Oh, Linda, don't start," she said. Those 3 words cut deeper than any admission. Don't start? Start what? Start acknowledging the theft of my home? I repeated the question slowly, carefully, each syllable sharpened by disbelief. Did you sell my apartment? A muffled rustle. A sigh. Then my father's voice replaced hers, gruff, impatient, as though I were inconveniencing him with a trivial matter. "We needed the money," he said. "And we knew you weren't living there. You're abroad. You told us before you left that things were going well. So we took care of it." Took care of it. My throat tightened. "You sold my home without my permission. How did you even manage that?" There was a pause. A long one. Then my mother said, in a tone that implied reasonableness rather than audacity, "We used the power of attorney. Remember? You gave it to us years ago. You said you trusted us." "That document was for medical decisions," I said. My voice sounded distant, hollow. "Only medical emergencies." "Well, it didn't say that in the form." My father sounded triumphant, as if exploiting fine print justified everything. "And it was notarized. So we used it." I closed my eyes. A decade-old legal document, signed before a surgery, twisted into a weapon. My parents had unearthed it, wielded it, and executed a sale worth nearly $380,000 behind my back. "And the money?" I asked softly, already fearing the answer. My mother inhaled sharply, as if bracing herself. "Well, most of it is gone." Gone. A house-sized sum of money evaporated as swiftly as a paycheck at a casino. "And now," my father added, "things are tight this month. Can you help with our rent?" I nearly dropped the phone. It was not just betrayal, it was entitlement layered atop deceit, wrapped in parental expectation. "You stole my home," I whispered. "And now you're asking me for money?" "We didn't steal it," my mother snapped. "We handled it. We thought you'd understand. You've always helped us. Why is this different?" "Because it was mine. Because boundaries existed for a reason. Because no one, no matter their DNA, had the right to take something so essential from another person." I felt something shift inside me, not rage, not sorrow, but a cold, precise resolve. For years, I had been the responsible daughter, the dependable one, the one who made things tidy after my parents made them messy. I had overlooked small betrayals, glossed over inappropriate requests, swallowed discomfort by the teaspoon. But this was no teaspoon. This was a landslide. Before I ended the call, I asked one final question. "What did you tell the realtor?" My mother hesitated. My father did not. "We told them you approved the sale," he said, unashamed. "They didn't question it." I hung up without goodbye. My hands were trembling. My heart was thundering, not with panic, but with clarity. They had lied to me. Lied to professionals. Lied to themselves. And they believed, truly believed, that there would be no consequences. They were wrong. In the silence of my small temporary apartment abroad, memories began unspooling in my mind, threads of the past I had tucked away, smoothed over, reframed as quirks rather than warnings. My parents had always been this way. Irresponsibility wasn't a phase for them, it was a lifelong companion. When I was 9, our electricity was shut off for a full week. My mother had forgotten to pay the bill. She claimed the notice had been misplaced. My father insisted the utility company was harassing us. I did my homework by candlelight. When I was 12, we nearly lost our rental home because they hadn't paid the landlord in 3 months. My father promised him the money was coming any day now. That day never arrived until I, at 15, began setting aside money from my part-time job just to contribute to their rent. My childhood was a masterclass in emotional gymnastics, loving two people who were endlessly charming, creative, and warm, yet fundamentally unreliable. They weren't villains. They were dreamers trapped in adult bodies, expecting others to handle the practicalities of living. I had always wanted to believe they would grow out of it. That time would teach them discipline. That aging would bring humility. But instead, their dependency grew thicker as the years passed, like ivy creeping over old brick. Looking back now, I realize their envy was always there too, subtle, buried under jokes or dismissive comments. When I bought my apartment, my mother clapped her hands with too bright enthusiasm. "Oh, Linda, you've always been lucky," she said, though luck had nothing to do with it. When I showed my father the renovated kitchen, he whistled and said, "Must be nice to have money to burn." Money to burn, after a decade of sacrifices and extra shifts. Still, I kept trying to see the best in them. They were, after all, my parents. And loyalty to one's parents runs deep, even when it weighs heavily. The power of attorney, that was the perfect symbol of our dynamic. I had signed it years ago, trusting that if I were in a hospital and unable to speak, they would act in my best interest. It was not meant for finances. Not meant for real estate. Not meant for anything other than medical emergencies. But I hadn't been specific. I hadn't rescinded it after the surgery. I had allowed it to sit quietly in a drawer at their house, gathering dust and latent potential for disaster. I had handed them a tool. They had turned it into a weapon. And perhaps the cruelest part was this: deep down, I knew their motives weren't rooted in malice. They didn't wake up one morning planning to hurt me. They simply believed that my success was a communal resource. That what was mine was, by extension, theirs. They had blurred the line between parental support and personal entitlement so thoroughly that theft no longer looked like theft to them. But intentions don't erase consequences. And love does not excuse harm. I packed my things that night with methodical calm. The next morning, I booked an early flight home, not to confront them, not yet, but to begin uncovering the full scope of what they had done. And as the airplane rose into the sky, I felt the weight of betrayal settle into something more useful. Purpose. When the plane touched down, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and vigilance. Jet lag tugged at my eyes, but adrenaline kept my feet moving. Before I even visited my parents, before I slept, before I unpacked, I went straight to the heart of the matter, the real estate office that had sold my home. The building was modern and glassy, full of bright paintings and scent diffusers meant to relax clients. The receptionist, cheerful and oblivious, asked how she could help. I said my name. Her smile faltered. "Just a moment," she murmured, disappearing behind a frosted glass door. Minutes later, a realtor, thin, tense, shoulders too high, invited me into her office. She shut the door carefully, as though afraid someone might overhear. "I'm very surprised to see you," she said, wringing her hands. "Let's begin with how my apartment was sold without my participation," I said calmly. She swallowed hard. "Your parents presented a valid power of attorney. They told us you had approved the sale. They said you were abroad and had asked them to handle everything for you. And you didn't contact me to confirm?" Her eyes darted away. "They insisted you didn't want to be bothered. That you trusted them fully. And the document appeared legitimate." "What exactly did they say?" The agent's voice dropped to a whisper, as though sharing a rumor rather than confessing to negligence. "They said you were moving abroad permanently. That you wanted a quick sale because you had already bought a place overseas. They even said you had thanked them for doing this for you." I stared at her, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. She reached into a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and placed it before me with trembling fingers. "I think you should see everything." Inside were emails, forms, closing documents, signatures. Some bore my actual signature from old files. Some bore signatures that were clearly not mine. The realtor watched me read with growing discomfort. "Your parents were adamant," she said. They spoke with so much confidence. We trusted them. Trust. What a fragile thing. And how devastating when misused. I gathered the documents neatly. I'll need copies of everything. She nodded quickly. Of course. As I walked out of the office with the folder under my arm, a strange calm washed over me. Panic had burned away, replaced by clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a small boundary crossed. It was a deliberate act, signed and sealed. But the investigation wasn't finished. My next step was legal. By the end of the day, I was seated across from a property attorney with decades of experience etched into the lines of her face. She reviewed the folder with increasing sharpness in her gaze. This sale was executed under misrepresentation, she said. Potentially fraud. We can contest it. I breathed out slowly. Relief. Fear. Vindication. All tangled together. What do I need to do? First, she said, revoke the power of attorney. The turning point was beginning. The attorney moved swiftly. Within hours, the power of attorney was formally revoked and recorded, severing a 10-year legal tether I should have cut long ago. She printed the revocation document, slid it across her desk, and watched me sign it with finality. That will prevent any further actions on your behalf, she said. Now, let's talk about reversing the sale. She drafted letters, precise, assertive, legally dense, addressed to the buyers, the title company, and the realtor. These letters declared that the sale had been conducted under false pretenses. It cited the misuse of the power of attorney, the lack of my consent, and the misrepresentation of my intentions. This will freeze everything, she explained. No one can process the funds or finalize the transfer until this is resolved. What happens next? I asked. She leaned back in her chair. Most likely, the sale will be reversed. The buyers will receive their money back. And your parents will be responsible for returning every dollar. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that the truth was surfacing. Sorrow for the innocent buyers. And dread at what my parents would face. That night, I returned briefly to my apartment, the place that was still legally mine but physically occupied by the young couple who had purchased it in good faith. I knocked softly. The door opened to a woman in her 20s, her expression polite but cautious. I explained who I was, why I was there, what had happened. Her eyes widened with sympathy, then frustration, directed not at me, but at the situation as a whole. She and her partner allowed me inside. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, tracing the windowsills, feeling the ghosts of my life in every corner. My bedroom still smelled faintly of the lavender candle I used to burn. The closet hooks I installed were still there. It felt like stepping into a parallel universe, my home, but not my life. The woman placed a hand on my shoulder gently. We had no idea, she said. We're so sorry. I nodded. You did nothing wrong. As I left the apartment, the weight of the truth settled fully into my chest. My parents had spun lies without hesitation, involved strangers unknowingly, and assumed there would be no repercussions. But the law was on my side. And so was the truth. The next morning, it was time to speak to them face to face. I drove to my parents' home just after sunrise. The sky was pale blue, washed clean by the night. I parked across the street, steadying myself with one deep breath before walking to their front door. My mother opened it. Her expression twisted instantly, from surprise to apprehension. Linda, you should have called. I did, I said. And you lied to me. We need to talk. Inside, my father sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper as though his world were not about to tilt. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. Before we start, I said evenly, you should know that the power of attorney has been revoked. And the sale is being contested. My mother paled. My father stiffened. You had no right, he barked. You had no right, I replied. To sell something that wasn't yours. To forge my approval. To misrepresent my intentions. My mother's voice trembled, not from guilt, but indignation. We did what we had to do. We were drowning in bills. We thought you'd understand. I would have helped, I said. Willingly. But not like this. Not through theft. Stop calling it that, my father snapped. What would you call it? I asked quietly. He had no answer. I sat down at their small kitchen table. My mother hovered behind a chair, as though unsure whether to sit or flee. The sale will be reversed, I said. You will be required to return the money. My mother gasped. But it's gone. That isn't my responsibility, I said. You made these decisions. You will face the consequences. My father's shoulders slumped as reality settled over him. You do this to your own parents, he whispered. I didn't do this, I said softly. You did. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock, slow, steady, unforgiving. My mother finally sank into a chair, covering her face with trembling hands. We never thought it would come to this. It came to this the moment you decided my boundaries didn't matter, I said. I stood, placing a copy of the revocation notice on the table. Cooperate with the legal process. Do not attempt to interfere. If you do, the situation will escalate. They didn't follow me to the door. They didn't call after me. They just sat there, two aging parents realizing that their daughter had stopped cushioning their consequences. The legal unraveling took weeks, but it was steady, methodical, and irreversible. The buyers, though disappointed, were cooperative. They provided statements affirming that they believed, wholeheartedly, that I had approved the sale. My attorney worked diligently, gathering evidence of misrepresentation, forged expectations, and misuse of authority. Eventually, the ruling came: the sale was void. The apartment was officially returned to me. The buyers received restitution from funds that had already been collected from my parents through court-mediated arrangements. My parents, however, faced a financial collapse. They had spent recklessly: trips, home upgrades, debt payments, small luxuries that accumulated like dust. They were forced to sell their car first. Then small items of value. Then they drained what little remained of their savings. But it wasn't enough. They downsized into a small rental far from the neighborhood where they'd lived for 30 years. Their friends asked questions they couldn't answer truthfully. They avoided community gatherings. My mother stopped volunteering at her church group. My father stopped chatting with neighbors on their morning walks. Silence settled around them like a fog. I didn't relish their suffering. Revenge was never the goal. Truth was. Boundaries were. Accountability was. They had lived their entire lives evading consequences, weaving excuses, relying on others to patch the holes in their choices. Now the holes were too large to hide. During this time, they called me only once. My mother's voice was quiet, subdued. We're moving, she said. No accusations. No guilt trips. Just a tired resignation. I hope the new place works out, I said. There was a pause. Then she replied, we won't ask for help anymore. And she meant it. As for me, I reclaimed my apartment. I repainted the walls a soft sage green. I replaced the curtains with ones that allowed the afternoon light to pour in. I bought a new rug, a new lamp, a new sense of peace. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt restored. Sometimes justice doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like quiet alignment, like the world returning to its proper shape. Months passed, and life returned to a gentle rhythm. I resumed my teaching part-time, tended to a small balcony garden, and relearned the pleasure of beginning each morning in my own home, my own sanctuary, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. My relationship with my parents settled into a distant, polite pattern. We called occasionally, exchanging weather updates and health concerns, but never discussing the apartment or the lawsuit. They treated me differently now, not fearfully, but respectfully. As though they finally saw me not as a resource, not as an extension of themselves, but as a separate, autonomous adult with her own life. In a strange way, their betrayal clarified everything that had been murky for decades. I understood the limits of unconditional loyalty. I understood that love doesn't require self-sacrifice. And I understood that boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks that you choose when to open. Sometimes, when the sun begins to set and my apartment fills with that warm golden light I've always loved, I stand at the window with a cup of tea and reflect on how close I came to losing all of this, not just the property, but the sense of self it represented. My parents hadn't taken my home. They had taken my trust. But I had taken it back. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know the deep ache of it, the bewilderment, the heaviness, the sting of realizing someone crossed a line you thought was sacred. But betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can refine you. Strengthen your voice. Clarify your boundaries. Trust is not a blank check. Even with family. Especially with family. And now I'd like to ask you, have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you cared about? I'd like to hear your story.